In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the upcoming severe weather events that we do expect over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We also have a couple of snow threats as we see our last chance of wintry weather here over the next couple of weeks as well. Let's just dive into things and take a look here at what the models have to say. And as we reach towards tomorrow afternoon, what we see is very, very cold air here in the east compared to normal. We see that the heart of this is pretty flat, but considering just how long that area is, it's pretty impactful. The Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and maybe even portions of the Southeast are involved here. I'm not actually backtrack us. I usually don't do this, but we can see that overnight tonight into tomorrow, this is actually going to be a lot more potent and at its peak here for the eastern states as this really, really cold Canadian air reaches as far southward as Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and southern North Carolina. It really considerably flattens out, obviously, as we reach towards the daytime temperatures. Although this isn't really showing the exact temperatures, it's more like showing the air mass that's in place. So the high versus the low isn't going to change on this specific graphic because it's not based on temperature. It's more based on those upper air patterns, which do not fluctuate with time of day, of course. Once we move towards Wednesday afternoon on the 20th, we actually see that this cool down gets a little bit more juice as we reach towards the midweek and late week. We're going to see it actually get a little worse before it gets better. A couple of interesting things. We do have a bit of a wintry weather event happening for the day. Let's see when it starts, actually. I kind of want to get the start of this, and it's going to be overnight Tuesday into Wednesday when we really see these things starting out. And by the afternoon/evening time, we do see that the Northeast and portions of the Mid-Atlantic do get involved with some light to moderate snowfall. And even as we head towards later overnight, about 5 a.m. or so, we see this low gets a little bit stronger and we actually get some heavier snowfall for perhaps New Hampshire in through Maine. So a little bit more of a sizable event for those folks. And it does come to an end after the afternoon. So maybe a good 6, 8, maybe even 10 hours of heavier snowfall could lead to a good 6 to 10 inches if it does actually happen the way this model is projecting. So keep that in mind. By Friday, we have some interesting stuff going on. We still have this kind of Arctic component sitting here, but we also have a lot of moisture trying to join the party in the form of these thunderstorms that are really, really surging over the deeper south and southeast, and they're making their way into this boundary where the humid, warm air is meeting that colder air. So maybe some instability here across these middle portions of the eastern states wouldn't surprise me Friday into Saturday. Let's actually move this towards Saturday, and we see that all of this reaches the east coast. Now, a low is forming offshore, which likely would cause this to be mostly a heavy rain event and not really a thunderstorm event. I can't outroll, obviously, any thunderstorm activity, especially south of the low. I'd say South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida especially here. But even North Carolina up through the Mid-Atlantic, perhaps going to see a crackle of thunder or two before that fully moves out. Now, we're kind of left with an opposite pattern of what we were seeing by time we reach Sunday. So a full flip of the pattern here, where this warmer air is putting up a fight and trying to push back here in the east and especially the central states. We have this trough with stormy weather out west. But the biggest part of this pattern is this low here over Nebraska. While it's relatively weak, it is causing really, really heavy snowfall for Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Perhaps a massive snowstorm. We'll look at the totals later, but that could be pretty extensive. And then we get this really, really interesting setup. We have this coastal low 995 offshore of North Carolina seeing rainfall impacting the east coast. But once we look back westward, I want to first off put the jet stream on screen here so we see this surging warmth by the end of the week here into the beginning of next week. So this is for the high temperatures of Monday, March 25th, and this would be a relatively warm start to the week next week in the east. Maybe not as warm as we just saw recently this past week, but it could be considerably far above normal. I am watching this area here for severe weather activity, especially the areas like Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. I would say this pocket right here. And this will include areas like Dallas and Fort Worth, areas like Houston, so some larger Texas areas. And again, it's mostly this area because we have this low right here. So I know that this area is going to be that cold front and then warm sector area where I think the most instability would be. That's not to say that there can't be any north of that low, but I think that this is the primary low at this point, so we'd be watching everything south of here primarily for that severe weather threat. If this northern low, let's say, takes over as the primary threat, then we would see a far wider area of potential severe weather stretching northward through Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. The reason I point that out as a possibility, despite the obvious difference in intensity here, we have a 992 here to the south, which is considerably stronger than this 998 to the north. This is still 174 hours out, and this has been a very consistent signal that we've been seeing on the model, so I am confident that we will have a storm of sorts here across the central states. But there is plenty of time for things like this to change, where we see the northern low be more primary than the southern one. Things like that can definitely shift. I mean, even within 48 to 72 hours, let alone 174. So certainly plenty of time for those types of details to change. Now, as we reach towards Tuesday, notice the explosive progression of this whole system. And by now, the northern low is the primary one at 988. So we see this very strong cold front up and down this area. We'd be watching for potential severe weather throughout the deep south, Ohio Valley, even portions of the upper Midwest. So definitely something that we're watching closely here on the channel. And by Wednesday, we see colder air is really the theme for the west and central states here, as we have this really potent Arctic air mass sitting over both, again, the west and central states, with warmer, more wet weather across the East Coast, as we see this surging warmth still trying to make its way up the eastern seaboard here, alongside just some overall storminess that comes with this type of a strong jet stream moving straight northward like this. This is infusing that southern, very humid Gulf moisture straight up the East Coast, while we have this very dry and cold weather trying to hit it from the side. This is a recipe for a lot of activity in here, and sure enough, we do see that. So nothing too crazy, but certainly that is the cause for the widespread activity that we do have in place. By Thursday morning, this is the very end of the model run, so we can't go any further. What we do have is some storms setting up for the central states here. I imagine that a low will try to set up somewhere in here, and we'll have another cold front developing with potential severe weather probably in these areas. It could move a lot, as this is 240 hours out. I think the biggest takeaway here is it is very interesting to see another storm popping up here and potentially our next round of severe weather. So very active, if you can pick up on the theme. I mean, storm after storm after storm is definitely the theme that we're seeing here. GFS model, let's move through it. We see the cold air, we see it progress into slightly warmer weather. We get this different looking storm by this weekend. This is Saturday into Sunday, so the GFS very different here. 992 near New York City. Heavy snowfall for portions of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, so still that is on the table. Again, this kind of late March period is basically, hypothetically, the last threat for wintry weather. Of course, things do happen. We could see April pose a couple of risks. There has been years throughout history. I always say everything's possible, and people kind of, they hear that, they don't really process it. There were years where volcanoes happened on Earth, where we saw snowfall in the United States, the lower 48, in June and July, and I believe it was in New England, actually, with some of the first colonies there. So definitely some weird things can happen. That's a very long time ago and extremely rare, but just an example of how, we have lived, all of us have lived our entire lives without anything like that happening. Everybody alive that could possibly be watching this video right now, well, I guess this video might be here forever, so who really knows? But as long as it's still 2024, well, you know what? Here we go. Now one could happen later this year. Who knows? So as long as you are watching this on March 18th, 2024, before 9:52 p.m. Eastern Time, you've never experienced anything like that. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So that's why I always say things, anything's possible, because it truly is. Obviously, we don't call for those types of things unless there's real reason to think so. But I just don't ever want you guys to feel like the norm that you've lived your entire life is always just going to be that way, because weather doesn't follow those same guidelines. It doesn't have the same scope that you have. Whether you've been alive for 18 years or 82 years, weather has always existed. So much more can happen than what we've ever experienced. part of why I love weather. Anyway, I know that was a long spiel. That was kind of funny too. By Sunday on the 24th here, we do see another low taking place over Colorado. We get this heavy snowfall across the northern plains and upper Midwest, and rainfall out to the east here for the plains happening. Potentially thunderstorm activity and severe weather, like I mentioned. I believe it's the same one that we saw the European model place maybe a little bit further eastward over Kansas with this smaller cold front. Or it might even be the one where we saw the 2 lows. So you can see how different things look from model to model here. Definitely, regardless, on every model, it's posing a risk of severe weather for the deeper south central states. So we will be watching for that. I mean, that looks to be the trend here and what models have been calling for days now. We are watching this late week time frame for our next round of severe weather, so keep that in mind for sure. Even as we head into Monday here, look, 992 over Nebraska and Iowa here. Strong cold front underneath. Really large push of warmth right to the east of it. This is a recipe for severe weather. We have this cold front pushing in with the warm front surging to the north right ahead of it. That's giving that moisture, giving that heat, and this is bringing the cold and dry. What do we learn in school as kids? When the cold and the warmth mix, it's not good. I mean, it's as simple as that, and this is it mixing right on screen, right in the middle. Can't miss it. By Tuesday, we still have the same thing happening. This certainly looks a lot more intense than the European model had. I would say a potential severe weather threat from Texas and Louisiana as far northward as Ohio and Pennsylvania and everywhere in between there. So certainly a pretty widespread threat as well. Intensity is something that really happens over time. We can see that it does look pretty amped, but as far as to know how bad it's going to be, we, typically, and I'm saying we in the sense of weather people, not, we direct weather. I'm saying in the sense of weather people, what we watch for is that transition from these deterministic models, these longer range models, and when they switch over to models like your NAM 3KM, your HRRR model, some of those shorter range models, for those of you that enjoy looking at them yourselves, that is when you really get the bulk of that information. They have more features, more parameters, if you will, that we can look at, and you get that higher resolution look, and the storm is so much closer to happening. So a lot of beneficial stuff happens when we transition from those longer range models over to the short range ones. And that's when you really get an idea of the threats of tornadoes, hail, wind. Until then, you're mostly just outlining an area that looks like it'll have thunderstorm activity with severe weather components. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Now, by Thursday on March 28th, we have this strong low over eastern North Carolina. I said strong. I would call it probably more like moderate, actually, 1,001. Some snowfall across the mid-Atlantic and northeast here. Pretty minimal. I think the biggest threat here would be wind and rain for the most part. Again, that's Thursday the 28th. And instead of this tracking up the coast, which it really looks like it's going to do here, it actually just kind of slides to the east and really innocently moves offshore. So that would be a much less impactful look. Now, speaking of impactful, by Saturday morning, very early on the 30th here, we do have this same kind of cold front, warm front dynamic here. The warmth is surging to the north here to the east of that cold front. This would be another severe weather threat across the plains here. Again, Saturday, March 30th. And there we go towards the 31st. And then the 1st of April there, we see it for the southeast. This is a good look if you were hoping for thunderstorm activity in the southeast. 1,002 to the north of these areas. Again, we always look for the areas south of that low. So I'm going to draw a line here. Now, there is exceptions. There can be thunderstorms to the north of it. There can be, no thunderstorms to the south of it, but just plain rainfall. But typically, when I look at these events, it's the areas to the south of that low that I'm really watching for the bulk of that activity, and that would be here. Obviously, it's not going to be that widespread throughout the entire thing, but for these areas like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, the Delmarva, even southern New Jersey and southern Pennsylvania perhaps, back to West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, better yet, Missouri and Arkansas. Almost had it perfect there. Why'd I have to mess that up at the end? Anyway, I just named off like half the states, but that is the areas that we're seeing potential thunderstorm activity here. Again, you can see it to the north, and you can see really quiet showers to the south of it, but I would say 80% of the thunderstorms are to the south of it, and 80% of that kind of showery or wintry weather is to the north. Anyway, Let's keep going, and we reach all the way towards the 2nd. We get some of that activity lingering for the southeast. And right at the end here for the 3rd of April, this is the very end, very far out, so, you know, don't take too much of this as gospel. But it is, again, interesting, something I do want to point out here. Don't pay attention to the specifics. You know, this is Wednesday morning on April 3rd. Don't pay attention to that part. But this model is continuing to show more storms pushing in from the south, with this cold funneling in behind, so I'm going to draw it out. You know, a low developing in here, trying to develop a cold front, warm front dynamic. That is looking to happen again. Keep that in mind. As we move towards the upcoming pattern, I mean, definitely looking very, very interesting, very active, and both of these models at the very end want to show even more coming in. So it's just telling us, like, it's going to keep happening. It's coming in more and more and more. So we're in a very active pattern for now, and these models have it going all the way at least until April 3rd with no slowdown in sight, as this is the very final frame. So definitely very interesting, something we're going to track and we're going to watch with you guys and keep you guys informed. So be sure to subscribe for more weather related content just like this. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.